Hello, everyone. Welcome to Front Row Seat. Today we have a special guest, Tom Campbell, who is the author of My Big Toe trilogy that unifies science and philosophy, physics and metaphysics, mind and matter, purpose and meaning, the normal and the paranormal. Today, Tom will be picking a number and answering the question. Are you ready to play Pick a Number?
Of course. I'm ready to play Pick a Number.
Okay, well, pick a number.
Oh, 7,862.
Oh, I don't have that many questions.
All right. Well, tell me the limits in which I need to pick this number.
You need to pick a number between 1 and 11.
Okay. That's helpful. Okay. How about a 9?
All the details. They're not all going to be there. You just have to go with it.
All right. How about a 9?
All right. Here we go. All mammals have genetic programs called instincts. These instincts evolved to ensure survival and procreation to forward the species' genetic material into the future. Can you explain the environment humans evolved in and how this environment shaped the instincts that operate in the average man and woman, falling under the fat part of the probability curve?
Okay. Well, before I do that, let's talk a little bit about that fat part of the probability curve. Okay. What that means is that it really talks about numbers of people. You know, how many people are like this, how many people are like that, how many people are different. And if you take an average, you have all the different kinds of people there are, which is a very large number of different types of people. Okay, if you take all of those, then most of the people, that's what they call the fat part of the curve. That's where most of the people are. Maybe, 55%, 60%, 70% of the people fit in these categories. And then there are people that are maybe 20% are in the next category, and then maybe 10% the next. And as you go out on the curve, those are called the tails of the curve. So let's say we have height. If we just talk about how tall people are, then the fat part of the curve would be, let's say, between 5'3" and 6'1". And most people would be in that range someplace. So that would be the fat part of the curve. But there are people who are 6'6" and 6'7" and 7'2", and there are even people who are 8 feet. Depends on, but there are not very many of them. So as you go out under the curve, there's less and less of those kinds of people. So the people that are 8 feet tall or taller are probably way out under that, curve. When I say fat part of the curve, think of a curve that's, I'll get my hand up here where you can see it, where it's low here and then it goes up and has a big fat part and then goes down and then it's low again. The low parts are the tails of the curve. The big part where it goes up is the fat part of the curve. So that's just probability. It's a probability and statistics curve. So we talk about people who are 8 feet tall or taller, then that's probably way out there on the very far edge of that curve. There's just not many people that big, very few. One in maybe 1 million or 10 million or something. And usually it's because they have some kind of thyroid difficulty where they grow, abnormally big. And it's the same. Often those people are not basketball players, and sometimes they're big as well, but they have usually trouble with coordination. When you're that big, coordination is, you're not fast and you're not necessarily as well coordinated. So if you fall under that, I think they call it giantism, but it's a thyroid issue.
Oh, yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
So now you go down the other side of the curve, and there are human beings that are only, 3 feet tall. Well, that's also unusual.
Right.
1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000. I don't know what the numbers are, but there's very few. So that's what we mean. It's not that the people in the tails of the curve are not important and not significant. They are. It's not like you throw those away. It's
No.
just that when you're talking about issues like instincts and that kind of thing, Well, I talk mostly about what's under the fat part of the curve. That's where most people are. Because if we talked about everybody, we'd have to have a 3-day conversation.
Right.
You just can't do that because there's so many different people. So if we talked about everybody of every height in a discussion about height, it would take us hours and hours and hours to cover all the people from 3 feet to 8 feet and what they do and how they live and, the issues they have. And, it would go on and on and on. And it would just take a long, long time to have that. So we talk about height and we just talk about the fat part of the curve. And we're talking about most of the people. And again, it's not because the others aren't interesting. They are. Matter of fact, they're probably the most interesting. The people that are in the fat part of the curve aren't that interesting because they're just average people. The people out there are the people that are most interesting to study, to understand, to see the issues and so on that they have and how that works. And so they're much more interesting. But that's what we mean by the fat part of the curve. It's just that's where most people are. So that's where the discussion tends to go, because otherwise the discussion would just take too long. Now, why do we have people from 3 feet tall to 8 feet tall? Well, it's because of the huge uncertainty in biology. There's lots of uncertainty in biology, and that uncertainty often is random. You take the chromosomes in in the male sperm and in the female egg, and you put those together, and they can go together in literally billions of ways they can go together. That's why we have 8.5 billion people, 8 billion people on the planet, and none of them look exactly alike. Even the twins, seem to have little differences sometimes that you can tell one from the other. But in any case, that's just biology. And biology does the same thing across sexuality. There's all kinds of things from this, 1 in a million to the opposite 1 in a million, and they're all there. And all that happens just because it can happen. It's statistically, probability, it's possible. Mm-hmm. So because it's possible, anything that's possible happens. It just doesn't happen that often. So if you got something that's a probability is 1 in a million, then only 1 in every million people are going to be like that. You see? So the thing is that we have to have a better attitude toward the people who are out on the fringes, because they're not usual, because they are unusual. Then often we create problems for them, like there's no way for them to get upstairs, or there's no way for them to do this or that because they only have one leg, or other sorts of things. So it's the diversity that we have within humanity, and even within all the animals and the plants. It's that diversity which is what is so important. That we all grow up better if we have lots of diversity, lots of understanding, and we should be very thankful for all those people out there, on the tails of the curve, because they make our life more interesting. They give our life more depth. If everybody were the same, if everybody was exactly, 5 feet 11 and a half, yes. That's boring, right? That doesn't give you opportunities. It doesn't give you differences. It doesn't allow for different tastes and different attitudes and likes and dislikes. And it's narrowing down the possibilities. Now you have less decision space because there's a lot of sameness. So if everybody was the same, it would be hard to grow up and learn. There would be very little that would be different for making choices. The choices would all be a narrow set of choices. So we should really celebrate and relish all of those people, and we should look at them as enriching our life by giving us more diversity, rather than, they're different, so we don't have to bother with them. We don't have to make stairs so that they can go up them, and we don't have to make this or that because, they don't count so much because there's so few of them, well, that is a very bad attitude. So that's part of our growing up, is for us to be aware of all the diversity that's in our world and care for it equally, because all of it's important and all of it's significant and all of it is growing up just like we are. And that diversity gives us more decision space in which we can grow up, more choices.
From their from their difference in perspective, because they bring a perspective that if you're in the fat part of the curve, you don't even see that.
Exactly.
And it's completely different, and it breaks you out of that normalcy of the way you think every day to where you can take in new ideas, have a bigger decision.
Exactly. You see, a good example of that, if you go back, I don't know, 100 years, travel was really hard, right? We didn't have maybe automobiles. We didn't, everybody had to travel on a ship, it was, if they went very far, it was very long and arduous and expensive. So most people didn't travel much, but the people who did travel, we call them sophisticated because they had more interaction with diversity. They had more interaction with people other than themselves. And that gave them a bigger perspective on the world. And the people who never traveled, the people that never got further than, 20 miles from where they were born, we called them parochial because they had a very little worldview that only took in what they saw in their tiny little world. And it's the same thing that you're talking about now. We have all these different kinds of people out under the tails of the curve. And by interacting with them and understanding them and being a part of them and, accepting them and bringing them, into our society, then the whole society gets enriched. The more you experience, the more different kinds of people you experience and you bring into your world, then the more grown up you're going to be, the bigger your picture is, the more understanding you have, the more empathy and caring you have. So, it's not that those people are not important. It's just there's not so many of them. Therefore, we, unfortunately, because most of us are so self-centered, we kind of forget about them and push them out there on the edges and who cares about them because there's not so many of them, so we don't have to bother with them, tough luck for them. And that's just a bad attitude that we have to grow out of, that self-centeredness. I'm talking about, the species. We, as a species, we tend to be very self-centered. And we need to grow out of that and have not only respect, but welcoming and very positive attitudes toward everybody who's not under the fat part of the curve.
And love everybody, not just the people that are like you.
Right. But when you see from another person's perspective, that helps you grow up.
Right.
That helps you see a bigger picture. So
we like to be around people that are more like ourselves, though.
We have a tendency to do that. People group up.
Yeah.
You find people like their friends, and your best friends are people who are more like you.
Yes.
And we have a tendency to do that, but that is not the best way to grow up. No, you're much better if you travel and you get out there and you see people, all kinds of different people. You'll grow up a lot more. Now, when you just are around people like you, that basically makes you feel safe. See, we talk about these instincts. One of those instincts is, survival is feeling safe.
Right.
And you feel safe when you're around people just like you because
you know what they're going to do.
You know what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and what they're going to think. So they're safe. And you see somebody who's different, and it doesn't matter how they're different, whether they're taller or shorter or smarter or dumber or, have different color hair or eyes. It doesn't matter. If they're different, then you're not quite so sure what they're going to be like. So you kind of leave them alone and go over with the people that are more like you. And that's unfortunate. That's something we have to grow out of. That's fear.
Yes.
That's fear of the unknown. It's fear of reaching out there and connecting with things that you don't understand and that but that's growing up, right? Is getting rid of fear. That's the whole point. So that's that's why people are so self-centered, is because they have fear. It's the fear that makes people self-centered. So So yes, when I'm talking about these instincts, I'm not talking about all the possible, permutations and combinations that could possibly happen, because that would be very, very complicated and very hard to talk about. It's not so easy to see that, because these aren't things like, things that you can count and measure. The instincts are things like feelings and attitudes and things that are kind of hard to measure and hard to talk about. And then if you mix them all up, some of this attitude, some of that attitude, and some of this and that, it gets really complicated in the stew, and gets too complex to talk about, really. Actually, it gets too complex to really know much about how that is. So I just talk about what's under the fat part of the curve, because that will suit 80% of the listeners will get that and relate to it. And the others will just have to see how that applies to them.
Right.
You see, they'll look at it and say, well, okay, this is a little different, and that with me, this is different, and that's different. So I can see that doesn't apply to me, but this other thing applies to me double.
Right.
They have to just kind of find themselves in those patterns, because they're human and they have the same kind of instincts.
Mm-hmm.
They have those same instincts that everybody has. That just comes mostly with being human.
Yes.
But the way they have to deal with those, the way, the situations that life puts them in, and the extra issues that they have, that the people under the center, the fat part of the curve, don't have those issues, then they just have to sort that out according to what we say about what's under the fat part of the curve. And I don't think that I don't know enough, and I probably don't know anyone who knows enough to really get too specific about how these instincts play out for people that are out under the edges of the curve. I don't know. It's everybody's different, and the differences are so slight and so many that it's hard to go there. That's why we talk about the fat part of the curve, because we're not smart enough to talk about anything else other than the fat part of the curve. That's about all we can understand. So
understand. At this point, this is all we can do.
Yeah. So you people that don't fall in that, you're going to have to figure that out for yourselves, because we just aren't smart enough to talk about that very much. And we're not
smart enough to talk about it, so we just won't today. How about that?
Yeah. And we don't have and we don't have the time to talk about it either. Right. That would be way more time than we have in our short hour to talk about all of the possibilities. But that's the point. Within humans, within plants, within animals, there's literally billions of possibilities. And everything that can happen does happen. Every once in a while, there's some things that are probably 1 in a billion, and some things that are just 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100 or 1 in 10. And then you see a whole lot of more, see a lot of those things that are 1 in 10, but still that's only 10%.
Right.
And that 10% is it's still under the tail, but it's a little closer to the middle. It's not quite so far out on the tail, but anyway, so that's about the variety we have. So I don't mean to be excluding anyone, but we'll stick with the fat part of the curve, because that's what I understand well enough to talk about. And the rest of it, folks will have to kind of apply it to yourself and see how it fits you. And if it doesn't fit, then it doesn't fit. Then it's not about you. You'll have to,
put it in the round file.
You have to figure it out on your own. People on the tails of the curve have to figure a lot of things out on their own, because they're out there within a culture that's not like them.
Yes.
And there's a lot of things they have to figure out on their own. It's not an easy space to live in. No. It's a tough space to live out there on those ends of the curve where you're different than other people. So it's hard, which is why we in the fat part of the curve need to be a lot more sensitive and caring and accepting and all those things, because it will enrich us as well. So anyway, now let's get back to the question. Now we got this fat part of the curve thing taken care of. Basic instincts that help us. What was it like back in the beginning days when our instincts were just starting to evolve, and how did they, how did they help us survive and as a species?
Procreate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, survival and procreation are really the two constraints that life has, on this planet. If you don't survive, obviously you will eventually become extinct and you'll disappear and you won't be on this planet. So the only things that are here are things that have not gone extinct yet. And there's a reason that they're here, because they're better at surviving and better at procreation. So you have to procreate. It's not just survival. If you just survive but didn't procreate, and eventually everybody die of old age and you'd be gone, right? There wouldn't be anybody else there. So you have to do both of those things. You have to spread yourselves depending on how your lifespan is. You have to create more all the time, because all animals and critters of all sorts, have finite lives. They don't live forever. So they have to procreate, and they have to be successful at that enough that the birth rate at least equals, if not greater, than the death rate. Otherwise, they'll just get smaller and smaller and smaller until they go away, and then they're extinct. So what about humans? Well, when in the beginning, humans, Homo sapien, wasn't the only, biped humanoid, let's put it that way, biped humanoid. There were others. Now we know about Neanderthal, but besides that, there was 4, 5, 6 of them altogether that we have fossil records of different kinds of humanoids that walked around, and any of them or all of them could have survived, but only Homo sapiens did survive. So it's not a very survivable form if you think about it. Look at humans and look at all the other animals out there, and we're slower. We don't see as well. We don't hear as well. We can't smell as well. Our reaction times are slower. I mean, if you think about all those things that might keep you alive, we're pretty poor at it compared to animals. I mean, most animals can see, hear, smell, move better than we can. You ever try to catch a dog that didn't want to be caught? You can't do it. They're faster than you are. You try to grab them and they're gone. You grab nothing but air. So humans surviving in that situation was hard. And we had predators that would prey on humans. Human was just another lunch, to the big animals that they had back then. And yes, and you go like this, but we weren't very fast at doing this. We were pretty slow if we had to run away, because that big cat or whatever it was much faster, stronger, and whatever than we were. So surviving was not a sure thing at all. It was a tough thing to do. And not only did we have a very harsh world to live in, but we humans are, of course, our own worst enemy. The thing that killed more humans than anything else is other humans, right?
Sure.
And that's because we had such a low quality of consciousness. You got to start at the bottom and work your way up. You don't start at the top. You have to start at the bottom and work your way up. Well, at the bottom, there's lots and lots of fear. And there were lots of scary things at that time. Just finding enough food not to starve to death was a real challenge. Finding shelter so you didn't freeze or so that you had, some way to survive the environment that you had. That wasn't easy to do either. And if one group of humanoids found another group that had food, and if the first group was bigger and stronger, then they could just take it away from the group that was smaller. So humans were humans' worst enemy. So if you found another bunch of humans and they had a really nice comfy cave with a little spring in the back for water, and you'd like to have that, well, you just take it away from them. Just throw them out. And if they didn't want to be thrown out, then there's a fight. And if there was a fight, somebody didn't survive. So not only did we have all those critters that were faster and quicker than us, but we had ourselves to deal with. Now, what other creature do you know that basically kills themselves, kills each other? Very, very few. You find the tigers don't go hunting, killing tigers, to take things away from them. It doesn't work that way. Now, maybe one tiger has killed a nice juicy meal. Another bigger tiger may come up and chase that tiger off, but it's usually not fatal. They've worked out, their instincts tell them, this other one's bigger than me, I'll leave. But humans don't do that. We tend to fight. We tend to struggle. We're not so quick to leave. It's not part of our instincts. Our instincts are more to fight than run away if we think if we might win. But in any case, besides that, so it was a rough place. Humans were very hard on each other. And the one thing that was very valuable, most valuable thing among humans was children, women who had babies. They were extremely valuable to the human tribe because that was the procreation and the survival, right? It had to do with those women being pregnant, and this is where sex comes into instincts. All our instincts are going to be wrapped around survival and procreation. That's where the instincts are going to be found. They're not going to be found, in other parts of us. They're going to be found in our sexuality and in our ability to survive. So women were very valuable to a tribe because they had babies, and the babies made the tribe bigger. And bigger is very important because bigger survives. So if you have 100 people in your tribe and you run across a tribe of 25, well, you can take their stuff. And when you take their stuff, you can also take their women and take their children, because now you'll have more than 100. You'll have more. So women were valuable and were almost never killed in these wars, in these struggles between humans. They were prized. And it's not that the women then became slaves of the other tribe. They didn't. They were just integrated into that tribe as females in that tribe. And they were treated like other females in that tribe.
Just got a new husband and went on with it. I mean, what else could they do?
But the men, you see, they are expendable. So the women are valuable, but the men are expendable. The men had a lot of dangerous work to do. And they often didn't live all that long. So the women would have maybe a series of mates. Okay. So that kind of a hard environment, why did Homo sapiens survive and all the others didn't? It's because our instincts grew. We became really, really good at having babies and at keeping those babies alive until they became adults that could have babies, till they were old enough. We got really, really good at that. If you look at the chimpanzees or other bipedal, apes, monkeys, and so on, that are kind of closest to us, indeed, they say we have 97% of the DNA between us and the chimpanzees, the same. So if we look at those as our distant cousins, then you'll see that they, like other animals, the females come into heat like maybe once or twice a year, and that's all. And they, they have a male that is the dominant male, and he chases all the other males away. So he gets to impregnate most of the females, because the females would rather be pregnant by him than the other males who are not as strong or big or whatever, because strong and big is good in those days. That means you could survive better, right? Strong and big. So then their babies had a better chance of surviving if they, were, stronger and bigger. So in any case, that's the way the monkeys and the chimpanzees worked. But we humans had to procreate better than that, because we weren't just in the trees that were a little safer eating bananas when we could find them. we were out walking around in the world where all the other big predators were and where all the other people were. So humans, of all the bipeds that were competing with each other, the females didn't go out of heat. They were sexually receptive all the time. They could get pregnant almost any time. Any month was a month that they could get pregnant. It wasn't like twice a year. And so the birth rate went up. Now they have usually just one child, right? So you need to have a lot of pregnant women stay pregnant as much as they can. If you had a woman that's pregnant, then she is not going to be out fighting, to stay in the cave. You have to take care of the women. You have to take care of the children. Otherwise, they're not going to survive. Right. Think of a woman who can get pregnant every 9 months, right? She carries a baby for 9 months, and within 2 or 3 months after that, she's pregnant again. And then she carries a baby for 9 months. With 2 or 3 months, she's pregnant again, and so on. She is not able to take care of herself because eventually she has 3 or 4 or 5 children who are all very young that she is taking care of. And for those children to survive, she needs to be taken care of, and so do her children. She's not going to be fighting. She's not going to be, doing the things that the men are doing. So we had this division of labor in Homo sapiens that they didn't have in any of the other. It was one of the things that the anthropologists found out about the Neanderthal is they seem to be more egalitarian than the Homo sapiens in that everybody did everything. See, and the females did all the same things the males did, and the females were a little smaller than men, but not much. They were about the same size, and everybody seemed to do everything. And a lot of primates are like that.
They're out there scrapping it and fighting.
They're all everybody. The males and females. Well, dogs and cats are like that. The male dogs and the male, and the female dogs. Basically, everybody does everything. All right, the males do more of this, and the females do more of that. But in general, their worlds aren't that different. Their worlds aren't that separate. Well, with Homo sapiens, we did the specialization of labor, right? That's what Henry Ford figured out about building automobiles. If we specialize and you get a bunch of people just doing one simple task, they get really good at that task. And they can make a lot more cars if you have this differentiation of labor. So we had men who then got bigger and stronger and bulkier, and women got smaller because that way they didn't eat quite so much because they weren't doing the heavy labor. And the women and the children got taken care of by those men. Those men felt obligated to find them shelter, to protect them from all the things that could get them and from the other humans that would like to take them. So this has lots of ramifications to it, just this basic idea. Females get pregnant, males don't. Our species survived because we got better at having babies. And that changed the male and the female. And because we split the chores. Men took these chores, women took those chores. Everybody didn't do everything. The women needed help, the men took care of them. And that was kind of the way our instincts came, that we still have those instincts today. Now, another thing that's interesting, the anthropologists and biologists have never been able to figure out this why is it that female humans have large breasts? If you look at female chimpanzees, they don't have protruding breasts. Their breasts are very tight and firm, right? Yeah. Female humans have these big protruding breasts, and all the other mammals don't really have that. Dogs, okay, female dogs, their breasts or teats, they grow some, they swell when they have puppies, but then they kind of disappear again, right? Yes. So humans are the only ones where the females have these large protruding breasts. So why is that? Why was that survivable? You see, so that's a thing. Also, females tend to, in most cultures, wear their hair long. Guys do not. Why is that? All right, it could be just style, but how come in 100 different cultures all over the place, it tends to be that way? The females have the long hair. Okay. Now, why is it that men are particularly attracted to women with large breasts? Why is that? You see, now, there's an answer for all of this in our instincts. Remember, I said that women were valuable and men were expendable. Well, if you're a tribe and you're going to attack another tribe, you don't want to kill their women. You want to be able to see, you want to keep those women alive because women made you stronger. They gave you more people in your tribe, and the power had nothing to do with tools, had nothing to do with weapons. Power was numbers. How many people do you have in your tribe? That was where power came from. If you had 1,000 people, wow, you could kick out everybody. If you only had 6, oh, you were vulnerable to everybody. So power came in numbers. That's why women were so important. So we had to evolve a way that in those skirmishes and little wars and tribal fights, that the women survived. So you have to be able to tell that a woman's a woman from, 100 yards away? How far can you shoot an arrow? How far can you throw a spear? Well, you need to know that that's a woman and not a man from that distance. And the only way you can do that is if she looks different than the men in some visible way that you can tell that's a woman. You see? So big breasts. When her body has these breasts on them, you have immediate knowledge. And if her hair's long, you have immediate knowledge. Well, how come she grows her hair long and he doesn't? Long hair is very dysfunctional in fighting. Remember, they didn't have guns and things. They had all their fighting was hand to hand, right? It was fist and sticks and rocks and that kind of thing. It was all hand to hand combat. So if you have long hair, that's just a handle. Somebody would grab you. They can grab hold of that hair, and that's not good at all. So the men would tend to keep their hair cut short so that wasn't, so in a fight, they weren't at a big disadvantage. And the women grew their hair as long as it would grow because that identified them from a distance as women. So you see a woman with longer hair and breasts, and she's safe. Nobody's going to hurt her. No matter who wins, somebody's going to take care of her because that other tribe is going to take her and they're going to take care of her. They're going to feed her. They're going to take care of her. They're going to take care of her children because they're valuable because all power comes from numbers. So see, that answers a couple of things. Why are men interested in women with large breasts? Because those women are going to survive. So if that woman is your wife, and you have a very risky life, you may not live, but you want your genes to go forward, right? You want your genetic material to move forward. Well, if she has your babies, your children, and they're young, or if she's pregnant with your child, then you want her to survive. And if she has larger breasts so that she can be seen from a distance, she's more survivable than a woman that doesn't have that. She's more likely to survive. So men want to would like to mate with a woman who's more survivable because then their genetics are more survivable. So that's why men particularly, notice a woman's bust line because she's more survivable. She'll take his sperm and his babies and she'll move him forward. And that woman now will be taken into a new tribe and taken care of there. Some other man will be assigned to taking care of her and seeing that she gets fed, her children get taken care of. And so there's lots of things. Women helped each other, right? They helped each other take care of children. So somebody gets sick, somebody else comes in and helps. So women had this thing that in biology is called own group preference, where they like and connect and form relationships with other women. Men don't. Men don't have that. Men tend to be more just individual. Yes, men have to cooperate with each other because hunting required cooperation. You know, if you're going to catch that deer or that rabbit, one guy by himself has a harder job than several working together, being cooperative. So men learn how to cooperate, but they didn't get that close to the other men because those men are, likely die, and so might they. So it wasn't so much with personal help as it was just cooperation. So men are good at cooperating with others, but they don't have own group preference. They don't form really deep relationships with other men. Other men are just other men. They work with them, they cooperate with them.
They talk to them, but they don't.
They like them, but they don't get close. They don't, sit around and chatter about things, and they don't share their personal issues and that kind of stuff. They just
Well, they
keep
don't talk
all
about
that.
the emotional stuff anyway.
Yeah, they keep all that to themselves, and
Right.
and all that emotional.
Yeah, fishing stories.
Yeah, right. The emotional stuff is kept down and out because that is not helpful. That isn't helpful. Besides, the other guys really just don't give a damn. They don't want to hear it. It's not their problem,
They don't.
So that is difference, you see. So we see all these differences we have, we see in ourselves. They're all part of our instincts, and they're all part of our survival. And the reason that Homo sapiens was the only hominoid to make it, that survived. And because women they weren't only fertile, twice a year. They were fertile all the time. And not only were they fertile all the time, but they had instincts that they wanted to have sex all the time. And men wanted to have sex all the time. So both males and females had sexual drives that said, have sex, make babies, have sex. That's a good thing to do. So the sexuality. Yeah.
We'll be safer if we do all this way.
Right. Exactly. The more you have, the more safe you're going to be. So humans are, when it comes to primates, humans are very sexy primates. We have a lot more sex and whatever than other primates do. They don't act like us, and that's why we survived in a world that we really weren't very fit for. We couldn't see, smell, hear, run. We couldn't do any of that stuff but we could have sex, and we could make more humans.
That's the only thing we were good at.
We could make more humans faster than they could kill us off. Right. So that's what happened. And the men protected the women and the children. So the men got killed off. But that wasn't a problem because, one healthy male can probably keep as many as 20 females pregnant almost all the time. So the fact that there were fewer males because they didn't survive was not an issue. Men would often have, more than one wife. It wasn't the nuclear family we have today, but women were to be kept, taken care of, kept healthy, kept their children. Now, the men, if you think the men would hold a grudge and might want to, get even, if that was a problem with men, then you killed the men. You didn't keep the men. Particularly, if their children grew up to kind of not like the tribe. So the men usually were killed, the women not. The women taken under the wing of the new tribe. So that's another.
They killed all the men?
They tend to kill all the men made from puberty up. So if you were, past puberty, then you just got killed because they didn't need people inside their tribe that were not with the tribe, not for the tribe, that were angry or needed to get even. So that was typical. And out of our history, if you look at the histories, you'll see that is basically the way it is. One tribe overruns another. From all the males from puberty and older, all get killed by the winning tribe. All the children and the women get pulled into their tribe. So that's the way life was.
So not just a few women would lose their husbands. All the women would lose all their husbands, or all of their
Yeah,
mates
right.
time. So the woman would have had to kind of deal with that.
Exactly.
Okay with it.
Yeah, and she
Time to
had,
switch, everybody.
yeah, she had to have this idea that, you know, that the man that was taking care of her might not always be the man that would take care of her, that she would have other men, but there would always be men that would take care of her.
Right. Well, you got the new ones now.
One place, yeah, you got new ones now. And life could get better or could get worse, you know, depending on who you got. But then there's a good chance that you'd get another one after that. So that was the idea. So women had to be kind of flexible, if you like. And within a tribe, say, not even talking about warring between tribes, but within a tribe, women had the idea that they kind of had to stay in circulation even if they were coupled with a particular man. Okay, because that man dies, she had to have some other possibilities already kind of lined up. You see? So the woman has her instincts, her instincts, okay, and here's the two sexual instincts that go for the man and woman. The man has the highest probability of his genetic material moving forward into the future if he has sex with every woman who will allow him to have sex with her. In other words, he would like to have sex with every female that would say okay.
And that's their instinct.
That's their instinct. So yes, if they see a nice looking woman, then they would like to have sex with her. That's just their instincts. Because if they could spread their seed and have a lot of women pregnant, then the probability that their genetic material would go into the future goes up, right?
That's the goal. That's the goal of the whole thing.
Right, that's the goal. Okay, so now men would like to have sex with any female who will welcome them, any attractive female who would say yes. Okay, now it's important that the female gets to say yes or no. She always has the right to say no. And if she says no, it's no. Okay, so there's an instinctual idea in men that if a woman says no, it means no. Leave her alone. So she gets to choose. Now, the female, the way she gets her genes move forward into the future is she needs to be as attractive as possible. She wants to be attractive. And by attractive, that means she wants men to want to have sex with her. In fact, a woman would like every man to want to have sex with her, and she gets to choose which ones do. You see, so that gives her choice. She can now choose those males that are more likely to survive because they're stronger and they're faster and they're smarter and they're whatever, or they have more wealth, you know, they have more cattle or more sheep or whatever makes wealth in those days, you know. So however their status is and whatever resources they have, if they are then more powerful, okay, then that's the woman that she'd like. You know, that woman would like that kind of a guy for her mate, because the children are more likely to survive if he's got means and he's got power. Now, whether that's just because he's big and strong or whether that's because he's got a lot of money in the bank, it doesn't matter. If he has power, then those children are more likely to survive than if he doesn't have any power. They're less likely to survive. So she has an interest in these guys, and she wants the ones that are going to help her and her children survive, because that helps her move her genetics through. And she also, like I said, has to have a couple in waiting, because if he dies, then somebody's going to need to pick her up. And she wants it not to be just anybody, that somebody, you know, she wants it to be another good person. So she tends to smile and flirt and be nice and be feminine to every male, because that's what she does. You know, she tends to just keep those options open.
Open.
Yeah. Now, as far as So we get it down to, well, what about the idea of, one woman, one man forming a unit and staying that way, right? How does that work? Well, it works. There is some push in that direction, because if the female has a woman that's dedicated to her, then she's more secure than if he just gets up and says, I gotta pick another woman. I found somebody I like better. Well, that's not going to help her, because she may be pregnant and have 3 little kids, and suddenly there's nobody to take care of her. So she wants a man who she feels is going to stick with her and take care of her and her children. Okay. So in that sense, she's looking for a man that is going to be kind of true to her, right? So that's significant to her. Now, so there's a little pressure then to do this, what do we call it? What's the word for the one man, one woman combination?
Monogamy.
Huh?
Monogamy.
Monogamy, yeah. So there's this little push for monogamy. And for the man's point of view, there's a little push toward monogamy, because if he's going to take care of this woman and her children, he wants it to be his children. If he's going to invest his money and his time and his life in taking care of those kids and that woman, he'd like them to be his genetics that's going to move forward, not some other man's. So he would like his woman to be true to him and not be getting pregnant by somebody else. But on the other hand, so both of those are there's pressures toward monogamy. On the other hand, he's got instincts to make love to every woman that says yes, and she has instincts to make love to those men who are powerful and who seem like they're a step above the other men, okay, in some way in her mind. They're smarter, they're faster, they're stronger, they've got more resources. So both have an instinct that pushes them a little toward monogamy, and both have instincts that push them away from it. Because the woman, again, wants to be attractive to all men. She wants all men to look at her and want to have sex with her, because then she gets her choice. So she wants to be as attractive as possible. So she wears stuff to make her more attractive, and she, uses makeup. She wears clothes to make her attractive. She does all these things to make her attractive. That gives her choice. So you see, people are a little complicated. They have pressures to have them stay together in a monogamous relationship. That's good. Yeah. But it's really good it's good for the man if the woman is going to stay true to him, because then he's not putting resources into somebody else's genetics. And it's good for her.
And so that's going to make him upset. So she's in a pickle there.
Well, see, for her, it's good for her if he's going to stick with her, because then she's more secure if he's going to stay with her. Because otherwise she'd have to find somebody else, and one in hand is worth 2 in the bush, as they say. So that's good for her. So both of them would like the other one to be just, limit their sexuality just to them.
Right.
But themselves, they would like to, if they're male, have sex with everybody, and if they're female, kind of be sweet to that guy who has more power. So you see, so they each would like the other one to be monogamous, but they themselves have some instincts to not necessarily be that way, because they both want to keep options open for the female and to impregnate as many women as you can for the male, because that optimizes their getting their genetic material passed on to the future. So you see, we're a mixed bag of our instincts don't just push us together in a monogamous relationship. They also let us
tug and pull in other directions.
But only though in secret, you see. Because he wants
Nobody wants to talk about this.
Exactly. You see, that's the point. So it's sneaky. So the woman wants to appear to be monogamous to the man because that interests him. He wants that because he doesn't want to raise other people's children. Right. And she wants him. He needs to appear monogamous to the female because that makes her feel more secure. He's not going to walk off and leave her in a lurch. but neither one of them really, really wants to stay monogamous themselves. They just want the other person to be monogamous. But neither one really wants to stay monogamous themselves because they have instincts that push them in other directions at the same time. Now, part of that reasoning comes from the fact that early man probably didn't pair off. Early tribes were generally small, and I think the children just belonged to the tribe. So women got pregnant, women had children, men and women had sex, and the children belonged to the tribe, and the tribe took care of all of them. So every child had, 10 fathers and 10 mothers, and it all just worked out that way.
Yeah.
And the women worked together, the men worked together, and the whole tribe would survive, and all the children survived. So it wasn't until the tribes got bigger to where that wasn't too feasible anymore, that then you have to have smaller units, and you still had this pressure for monogamy and this pressure for each individual to kind of sneak out on the monogamy, but still making their mate think that they were monogamous, you see. So that's where we are. And if you look at what are people like today, how do humans act? That pretty well nails it, doesn't it, when it comes down to how do people act? What do we do? Now we have our culture, and our culture is one that is about monogamy, and it's illegal to have more than one wife and more than one husband, and we have all these issues, but we have instincts too. And what happens is that we pretend to meet all the rules of our culture, but we're still human animals with instincts, so we act out the way we are. Now, the good thing about instincts is that you don't have to let your life be ruled by your instincts. Your instincts are just there. But you can always say no. If your instinct says, "Oh, look, gee, that looks nice. That looks fun." Yeah, and you kind of have a little, kind of feeling that might be fun. But you can always say no. You don't have to. You don't have to entertain those instincts all the time. But here's the rub. If you deny your instincts, it'll make you crazy. If you deny your instincts, you're going to get neurotic, because anytime you go against what's natural to you, it takes will to force that, right? And if you deny instincts, that's not good for you. On the other hand, if you let your instincts run wild, that's not good for you either in our culture. You see?
What do we do, Tom?
So, what we do is exactly what you see people doing all the time, day in and day out. That's what we do. So the thing is, you need to be responsible, okay? And you need to have integrity. So if you and your mate have decided that you want to be monogamous and that's the way it'll be, then have integrity, you need to abide by that because you've promised, right? You've made a promise, and then you have to abide by that promise. Otherwise, you don't have integrity. You're not being straightforward. So the low entropy life says you need to have integrity. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be, that you can't be polygamous or whatever. It just means that everybody has to agree and be okay with whatever it is you do. So if you want to if you're in a monogamous relationship and you say, "Oh, I'd like to break out of that for just a little bit and have some fun," if your other person says no, then that's no, because you made that agreement. If the other person says, "Oh, sure, go have some fun," then okay, then that's different. So as long as you have integrity in the relationship, which means you're not sneaking, you're not cheating, you're not going behind anybody's back, then as long as it's a bunch of adults who all agree on something being okay, then there's really no rules. It's okay if adults all agree to it. But when it's not okay is when some of the adults agree to it and the others don't, you see.
The others don't, yeah.
Now, that's not good. So it's a matter of having personal integrity within a relationship. And we can tell our instincts, no, not now. Inappropriate. Okay, I see it. And I'll even do it. I will go out of my way to look attractive so that men would like to have sex with me. I'll do that, but I'm only going to take it so far. You see, so those are the rules. That's kind of the rules of our culture, our instincts, and we have to live a life of integrity with both. So we have to understand you've got instincts, because if you say, no, I don't have instincts and I don't like that, and all sex is awful and bad, and can't do this, but yet you've got those instincts, and you do want to look nice, and you do want men to look at you and find you attractive, and you do want women to find you attractive, and instead of fighting with the instincts and denying them, like I say, that'll make you neurotic. You have to say, okay, you have to be aware. Okay, those are my instincts. I feel that way. That doesn't make me a bad person. That makes me that makes me human. It just makes me human. And as a human, I have choice. I can say yes, I can say no, and I want to have integrity and be a high quality human that isn't sneaking around and hurting other people for your own pleasure, for your own enjoyment. So, this will feel good to me, but it'll hurt you. So I'll do it anyway because I'm self-centered and I don't care about you so much as I care about myself. That's what we want to grow out of.
And I just won't tell them. I'll just keep secret. And yeah. Fine.
See, that's what we want to stay away from. That is
guilt, and then you have all this other stuff.
Then you have all that kind of stuff, right? So on the other hand, you have to understand those instincts. So when somebody does kind of go outside the rules, instead of freaking out and going totally ballistic about it, you also have to look at it and say, okay, I understand where that came from. Now, what does that mean to us? Instead of, going bananas because you broke a rule, there needs to be some understanding on both sides. Okay, women have their instincts, and their instincts, are to submit to some guy that they really think is special or neat or rings their bell or whatever. That's the way they feel. And now they may not start it, but if he starts it, they just can't find the place to say no, you see, because their instincts are saying yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
So that's the thing. And the same with the guys. If the guy's getting some situation and there it is, and it looks like, and their instincts are going, yes, yes, yes. And sometimes they're just unable to say no. So you have to be aware of that and realize that that's a fact of life. We're humans. We're all humans. And hopefully we are humans with integrity that care about other people and not hurting. So we make promises. We need to keep those promises. You say,
but if we don't, and we already have a really good relationship, and we, it's something, really triggers somebody's instinct out there in the world, and then it happens, and it's not a usual occurrence, it's not a reason to just dissolve a completely good relationship.
Exactly.
Over one instance of, I'm sorry. Because if they don't know the instinct's there, and they don't know, what's going on in that
exactly
instant, driven, because that's what instincts are. You're just, here we go,
Exactly. So, that's the whole point. So looking at this from a lot of different perspectives, you can see that people are a little complicated in their sexuality. Men aren't just being shallow because they like women with breasts and being attractive is the main thing. That's because that's part of their instincts. That's the way they're made, and women aren't really they're going to try to make themselves look as attractive as possible to all men all the time. They just want to be attractive. It's not because there's something wrong with them and they're always out fishing for some guy to have sex with them. That's not the point. They're women. They have to look attractive. They want to look attractive. That's part of who they are. They want men to look at them and say, "Ooh, nice.
Ooh, looky."
Wow, I'd like to have sex with her, because then that gives them choice. So women That's why what the makeup and beauty industry is,
Avon and
$50 billion a year.
yeah.
Well,
Men don't have that. Women do.
No, that's because women have those instincts. You see, and that's also why the industry and and the marketing and everything else always shows pictures of scantily clad women on them, because that will attract men's attention like nothing else. Right here, buy this tire.
Buy this and you can be
Buy this
attracted.
tire and this box of nails, and they'll have a a woman in a bikini, pasted on the.
Towards you.
Yeah.
They come.
Yeah. Why? But advertisers know what gets attention, right? So you put a half-clad woman on a box of nails, and you're going to sell more of those nails because men are buying the nails, and they see that woman there and attract their attention to that box of nails, because that's just the way it works. So yeah, marketers use it. Everybody uses it, and women are going to look good, and they're going to learn how to stand and how to move and how to, sway their butt when they walk, and how to stand up straight, and have their breasts sticking out, and they're going to comb their hair, and it's nice and long and just a little bit down in the face, and they're going to learn all those tricks and about how to smile and when to touch, or hold a hand, and they're very good at knowing all those things, because that's what being a woman is all about. You do those things. It's not that they're wrong or they're hussies or they're always hustling or anything. It's just being female. It's just being female. And you just have to let people have their instincts, but be responsible, high quality people who keep their promises. And if they want to stray outside those promises, then they need to get permission. They need for somebody else to say, that's okay. Yeah. I'll allow you to do that because I understand this is something you want to do, and I think it'll be good. But it doesn't mean that it's going to end the relationship or anything. Yeah. But most people are too insecure, you see, to give that permission. They're too insecure. Well, if I let you go someplace else, then eventually you'll find somebody you like better than me, and then you'll leave me, right? That's the fear. That's the fear. But on the other hand,
most men love their wives. They don't want to go anywhere.
No, that is true. They do love their wives, but they're still men. And if some good-looking woman says, I'm available, yes. That's it. He's going to have to be a strong guy to turn around and say no. Most men will want to say no, and they'll think about, well, I really shouldn't do that, but their instincts are screaming, yes, 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 yes. And most of the time they're going to fail at that because it's the way it is. And same thing, you put a woman in just that position where, her instincts get triggered, and it's very hard to say, no, don't do that, back off, stop it. Yeah, they just say, well, I really don't want to do this, but I can't say no, Yeah. So anyway, that's instincts. That's where we get these instincts from. That's why men like women with boobs. That's why women are flirty and smile and use makeup and want to look good. And all of it has to do with our instincts. So monogamy is got pressure to make that work because there's advantages to both. But the big advantage is for the other person to be monogamous, not them. See, that's where the big advantage comes. But they know that if they make the requirement, then they kind of have to do that too. So that's the rub.
Yes.
So that's, and if you look at life and look at people and you look at history, you'll see that's exactly the way humans act. Yeah, it's just the way we are. But we get, because it's breaking the rules of our culture, then we feel guilty and we feel bad about it, but we can't help ourselves. And what's wrong with me? Am I weak? And, I shouldn't do this. And, but then you do it again. Oh no,
no.
And then you do it again, you see. And instead of saying, well, okay, what does that mean to our relationship? Now, here's another thing to look at. If you're with somebody, wouldn't you rather be with them because they want to be with you rather than because they feel obligated to be with you?
Absolutely.
If you're in a relationship where somebody only comes home at night because they're obligated to be with you, that's not a very good relationship. You might as well work on another relationship, right? So the point is, you see, if the other person doesn't want to be there, I can't imagine anybody saying, yeah, but you have to be there. You promised, so you'll be there. So suck it up, cupcake, you have to do this. Nobody wants to live with that kind of relationship. Everybody wants to live with somebody who wants to be there. They're there because they want to be there.
Yes.
So in that case, you tend to want to give people freedom to be who they are and do what they feel they need to do. Now, you want them to have integrity and to be open with you and to be straightforward, not being sneaky or anything, tell you exactly what's going on. But on the other hand, if somebody finds happiness someplace else, and you really love that person, you'll be happy for them.
Yep.
Because you love them and you want them to be happy. And what you'll always find is that even though that may hurt, you'll end up with something better afterwards. You'll end up with something and you'll go, oh, that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
You'll be with someone who wants to be with you.
You'll be with somebody who wants to be with you.
Yes. So
exactly.
It's better for you.
See? So on the other hand, right.
Loving choice.
Right. So if you look at it that way, you see, it's not such a terrible, the thing's not such a terrible thing. It's just, but what it does is it makes life more uncertain.
Yes.
You see, that's the issue. And there's the unknown, and there's that fear of the unknown, and that's what wads us all up.
Wads it up, yes.
Yeah. But if we don't have that fear of the unknown, if we get rid of that fear, then the people we love, we want them to be happy, whatever it takes to make them happy. We want them to be happy because we love them.
Yes.
And if they'd really be more happy someplace else, then we want them to be there. We don't want them to come home because they have to.
Be miserable with us.
Yeah. So you see, that's kind of all the variables. So I've kind of talked about the instincts, the male, female, the instincts, how we are the way they are, why men are the way they are, why women are the way they are, and why monogamy is kind of a tough thing to keep together for a long term, that you really have to work at it, and you have to have integrity. You have to be able to talk and communicate, and that sneaking around is a bad thing because that hurts people.
Yes.
That hurts people. But once we all understand this, I think it'll make relationships so much easier. There'll be more understanding, more compassion, more empathy for the other person.
Right.
And that will help relationships too.